Good morning. I am back here in our little town of Grand Ridge, and I promised you a few follow-ups to the issue. And the first thing we're going to talk about is voting. So those of you who know me personally know that I am very much an advocate for enrolling and registering voters. I want to show you here where I'm at. This is our Steel property. You probably saw that in the first video. This is our downtown street. We're getting ready here for Grand Ridge Days this weekend. Wonderful timing. Was that an accident? I don't know. And it will not rain on our parade, however. So here we are in front of Village Hall. And I want to show you the sign on the door. This is who is in charge. So we have Mayor Kay Hines, the village clerk, Christy McGuire, trustees, Julian Buckley, Cindy Cates, Jack Tideback, Jim Strickland, Ann Hinnerlong, Dennis Rocky, village treasurer, Kelly Harstead. So this is the place where anybody can come. This is a public place. They have some meetings here of other committees like the historical committee. More on that later. Only certain people can participate. It's an extension of the government, so it is not open to the public to join, or maybe just not open to me. So I'm here right now to give you a little insight on what's happening. So I'm gonna sit on this side so that we can have a beautiful view of our clock. This is a fun story about our clock, which you might hear from storyteller Bill Myers, who's gonna come over and give us some of his time on Saturday during the day. So we'll record it so you can hear that later too if you can't make it around. So I want to tell you that voting is critical. I have been in the village my whole life, 1979, I went to school here. However, my residence is 1 mile out of town, my primary residence. Therefore, I cannot vote here. I have no voting rights. If you own a business, it is important that you know, which I did not realize because I've never been having a business outside of my own district, but you do not get to vote. Not only do you not get to vote, but you also are not the trustees, the council, whatever name you give your government officials, are not required to give you the floor. So in other words, everything must be done via writing. Writing, of course, is record, but what about discussions? What about being able to come into a group of people and see what opinions there are, what issues there are, how to resolve things? It is not required. I was told that very matter-of-factly in the August 2022 meeting when Mayor Hines said, "You are not a trustee." My question was, I'm not getting all the information, and her response is, "You are not a trustee." So that is true. I am not a trustee. I will likely never choose to be a trustee because my role, and a role that you will see me stepping into, is actually public awareness and personal empowerment. That is my forte. I wish to tell you now, let's circle back around to voting. I do know a couple of the voting judges. I have worked elections at the county level here in LaSalle County many years. I've also worked elections in my neighborhood of Printers Row, Chicago, where I was an advocate for a neighborhood group. And our main goal was a buffer zone between the South Loop School, which at that time was the district for my third grader during his second grade and third grade. And also have been on very many grassroots projects. So I am not unfamiliar with the struggle and the challenges and, quite frankly, the corruption that takes place with power in politics. I choose to stay away from it. I'm coming to you guys right now, the public. Grand Ridge hopefully is listening to this because it matters if you are a voter in the village. So the people that we named at the beginning of this video are the people who are making your decisions. And maybe they're talking to you because maybe their disinterest in speaking with me and my husband, maybe their disinterest in consulting existing landowners and property owners. For example, we have a property owner, we have a known bed and breakfast business person. Actually, that's not true. It's her private home is listed on Airbnb because they don't actually live here all the time. So we're creating a bed and breakfast ordinance that is, setting the terms for how these people stay in business. And there's been no discussion or involvement with the existing companies. And by the way, it was very clearly asked by in a very straightforward way, will the people be required, because this term grandfathered in goes around a lot in this town, has for me for decades. And the village attorney said, no, nobody will be grandfathered in. Everybody will have to come up to pace with the current code. So I just give you that information because sometimes that is not clear, and maybe even between trustees isn't clear. And these are the types of questions that we are trusting our trustees to ask, so that these things are communicated clearly. But my concern, my genuine concern, is that the input is limited to legal input, very necessary input. It is limited to the experience of people getting it out of books or comparing it to other municipalities. We have some of that going on in Utica. We have some of that going on in Oglesby. You may have some of it going on in other rural areas, because this is a popular thing now, which, by the way, is not easily regulated. There's many places. My closest experience is a dear friend who has a lodge in Wisconsin, a very nice camping lodge, who is, going to his place and his government and saying, how are these lake houses around my lake not being subject to the same rules and regulations that I am being subject to? So these are very important ordinances to put in place across the board, no matter what the cause, but the piece of input from business owners, experienced business owners, or inexperienced and horrible business owners. It doesn't matter who they are, but they still are the ones who perhaps would be worth asking and having some input. In our case, we have not been able to express the value of that lot of land. So what you're looking at there are these two giant trees. They're actually our trees. We have a cute story about when they were planted. And they do sit on the line. I have heard through the grapevine that the village intends to at least trim them, probably cut them down. They've cut the great 200-year-old spruce tree down that was in their way behind this building, in their way for what Mayor Hines mentioned to my husband, Tim. Her intention is to create a two-way lane back there. We don't know those plans. We aren't privy to those plans. Those plans have never been discussed to the public. No plan, as a matter of fact, only mentions and dreams and maybe this and that have been thrown back and forth regarding the value of expanding Village Hall. A discussion has been made about needing an elevator and expanding to the back and having a police department attached with garages, all of these things. So these people that you have voted in are the ones making these decisions. They can't make them in the front yard, by the way, because then they would be violating some meeting code. They can't have two or three of them standing around and then start talking about a public meeting unless it is an announced meeting. So if that happens and you have trustees and mayors coming to your back door on holidays at 9 p.m. at night, then that could be an interesting segment of what's going on. Okay. The second thing is that maybe you're not voting. Get out and vote. You might be surprised to hear that 100, maybe I think less than 120 of you voted this mayor in. Okay. 87 or 9 of you who trusted Mr. Buckley voted for him. And then a handful, I think 20 or 30 people voted for Mervutis. Those were the 3 people on the ballot at this last mayoral election. Okay. So understand something that I maybe didn't understand later in my life, that when you vote for a candidate, so in this case, Merv and Kay were experienced mayors in the past. If you voted for one of them, then you're taking the vote away from the opportunity for new blood. So you could insert Republican, Democrat, Libertarian. You can insert your party however you want that to be. But when you're voting for people and making the good morning, then you have a responsibility to understand the voting process. This happens either in school, it could happen at public awareness. It's part of what I'm bringing to you here. Before the elections, we actually held a small roundtable of mayoral candidates and trustee candidates, and we hope to continue to do that no matter who is running. We being me and a community of people called Let Growth Unite Us that wish to have a greater community, a strong community. So your votes matter, voting at all matters. So I was very surprised that we had less than 250 people voting in the village during a mayoral election. I think maybe those people are all under 18, or maybe you just didn't make it to the polls, or you didn't get registered on time, or you didn't send your ballot in ahead of time. We don't know. Okay, a person on the outside doesn't know, and you can only do so much. So the first thing I suggest is go get registered. Make sure your registration matches your ID. This is the second requirement. When you go into a polling place, they will check your identification. You must match the ID. Your current permanent address must match the place where you are going to vote, okay? The third piece is that when you go in, you have the right to vote for people on the ballot, or you have the right to write in a ballot. So this happened in a previous election where there's nothing there. You can write Mickey Mouse. People do that. They think they're being funny. If you write Mickey Mouse, morning, Jerry, then what happens is your ballot isn't counted. And that's because Mickey Mouse didn't go out and solicit petitions and be proven by the district as a viable candidate. So a person who does that a little bit later than the time that the printing of the ballots happens, within the time frame of going and getting on the registry with whatever government or voting place you're going to, they must be registered ahead of time. So we did have that happen for trustees. I know Kim Olney and Jeff Cates were write-in candidates. Write-in candidates don't matter on a ballot unless that person then spends their time going around knocking on doors and saying, hey, write my name on the ballot. So Mickey Mouse can't get elected in because he's not there. So then your vote wouldn't count. So a write-in ballot is valuable only to the extent that the person canvassing and having a cause lets people know ahead of time they cannot stand. Even though we did have some of that here, we did have particular mayoral candidates standing at the polling place all day long. It's really not allowed. And unfortunately, in small communities, it's not enforced because a person doesn't want to confront a person that might later be in power of their personal space. So this is a very approach to perhaps corruption that happens in small towns. My lawyer, who actually was the mayor of Ottawa, Mr. Bob Eschbach, is very entertained and perplexed. I mean, I shouldn't put words in his mouth here, and I won't, but we are, it's fascinating that we're in a point of a lawsuit with what's happening here regarding our private property and the lack of communication ahead of time and the way things are handled. It's as we said, and as many people are saying right now, is that small towns are the worst. It's so political and so cliquey and us against them mentality. And unfortunately, my husband and I don't share that as our characteristic or principles. And so it's really a challenge for us emotionally and mentally to step into what we must do to defend ourselves and to hope for consensus. Consensus is not the way things are voted here. They're voted by majority. There are consensus is where a group of people, such as a sacred council, for example, it's what we use for our sanctuary organization, which is an incorporated 501c3 church in LaSalle County. We use consensus. That means that a council of trusted people get together. We talk about the issues that we're faced with. In our case, it's a lot of interfaith issues. How do we present Kwanzaa to Catholics? How do we say a sermon on Buddhism when people in the audience are Christian? We have a lot of interfaith decisions to make as a sacred vestryman council that are not voted by majority. However, in this case and in many governmental cases, majority vote wins. So that's the second piece of voting education. Understand the rules, just like softball. My husband and I attended travel league softball, and we needed the set of rules ahead of time each time because leagues play different rules now. Know the rules, know how the voting happens. The third thing about the voting process is these trustees are there around a table. In the case where our vote went to pass, it was a night when 2 people were absent, still made quorum. So that means that if 4 of the 6 trustees were present, which they were, then the mayor also can vote. Strategy. So in the case where there are 4 people who've made quorum and 2 people are absent and 3 people vote yes, and the other trustees that were absent might vote no, and 1 person votes no, then the mayor is allowed to vote her yes. Or his yes, depending on who your mayor or person in charge is. The next piece is that trustees who are presented by an attorney, in the case of Grand Ridge, these meetings are run by an attorney, every single meeting. Many of you from other communities, probably that would be unfamiliar. It would not be reasonable to have an attorney paid and available and booking hours every single meeting and handling how the meeting is run. For many people, that person is the mayor or president. And the reason is because that's what a president does. They always say, if you don't want to do much, be the president. Why? Because the president is there to make sure that everybody else is doing their job. They generally can go to the issues, talk about the issues. Their vote is not there. They give the issues and direct the people, and then they let the other people be in charge as committee members. The vice president of an organization typically does a heck of a lot more is in regards to daily function and getting things done. Okay, that is a corporate comment, by the way. So in that process, and in the case of what happened with us, when we have, for the last several months, this issue has been going on since my husband made a comment to Trustee Rocky that we preferred to do our own maintenance of our own private land, and we did not want the village snowplow in charge, and we did not want snowplows that are hired by other tenants behind there to do our property. It's just that's what we want to do. We want to take care of our own land. And ever since then, of course, there has been, we're going to be a problem. This is going to be an issue. Well, of course it is, because we believe it's our private property. We bought a warranty deed that says it's a private property. We had no reason. We have the history and many deeds, warranty and non-warranty, quit claims and fund titles, all that show the history all the way back to when, let's see, Freeze's, Mr. Freeze, Graham, Mr. Graham. So probably six owners and 4 generations. And we actually have some of the even earlier titles for a lot of this land because we have a very huge interest in rural heritage. And we put an exhibit together, a traveling exhibit, which we hope will one day be a neat part of Grand Ridge Days each summer with the community here, because we'd like to bring our experience from Montana and Vegas and Cherry and Arlington and have it over here in Grand Ridge. The next piece of that vote is that when they're around a table and an issue comes up and you've gone to trustees at the kitchen table and say, how do you sit? Where do you feel? What's the issues? And you feel like you have support of the trustees. So that is what the responsibility is of somebody that has an issue. Then it's very surprising when the very people who say they support you and they do not feel it is a necessity to have that particular property as part of the public right-of-way when there is already a giant public right-of-way here, that they are the people to cast the first motion for this to go the next level. So in this case, the issue of the right-of-way is always already to the stage because we declined the $10 easement of 33 or so feet at the back of our property. The next step is that they are now having a vote for a proper appraisal, which, by the way, the stakes and the surveying and the was already happened long before this meeting where they voted for it. In fact, they may have even had all the information they needed, because for the attorney portion of the meeting, her only comments for the public part of an attorney meeting was not to educate or let anybody at the public meeting know what is happening with her legal pieces. But her only comment was that she was calling an executive session at the end of the meeting concerning real estate purchase. Therefore, it could have to do with anything. Oh, and there she is right now. Cheryl Cherney is the village attorney. She's not on the door, but she is hired and paid. We did put a request in so that you guys can know how much she does get paid each year and how often. And she purposely and on purpose drove through that space, which is her right. It's her legal right to trespass and do what everybody else has been doing for 100 years. Now, was that necessary for her? So she was parked over here by a commercial building. There is a whole city block. There is a room to turn around or go around a public block, but she very, very purposely came right through what is a public right of way. And what she's proposing, and is her job, to propose a public right of way, because this village council, this mayor in charge, and the council who sees a vision for the future wants their property to expand and be awesome. And so do we. We want our property to expand and be awesome. And we invested, by the way, first right of refusal was given to Joyce Miller, who was the village clerk at the time, was approached directly by Kevin Fries to say, does the village want this? And they did have several meetings about it, as did the fire department, as could have the Farm Ridge, because everybody knows everything in Grand Ridge. I didn't even know the dang place was for sale. Okay, I found out in the beauty shop the day that Steele had approached us to do this and require us to have certain requirements for our property. One of them is owning the property outright, okay? For us and our agreement and our agreements. Give me an opportunity here to come back to voting. Let us keep this about voting right now. Vote. You are the constituents. You are the ones who chooses. You are the people putting the trustees in charge. Your conversations with them, your rights, they may not be heard. They may not be. And please don't degrade people. Don't belittle them. Trustee Rocky belittled my husband by saying some snide comment about one load of gravel doesn't mean that you've maintained the property. Well, of course it doesn't. But we do have a long history of the former owners hiring professional contracts to grade. And we also had 9 months of a pothole that didn't get handled in months where other things around the village were getting handled. So we had no way of knowing or believing in any way that the village was maintaining the property. So I'm going to get into some of those more details later on. Right now, what is important for you to understand is do not belittle people, do not make them small, do not gripe to your neighbor. Write a letter, make a public comment. You can submit your public comment without being present at a meeting by sending it to the village clerk. Go on to villageofgrandridge.org to do that. You can do it all the way up until the time of the meeting, because she will print that out and enter it into public comment. Okay, but if you want to be on an agenda for a public meeting, then you would need to request that within, I think it's 48 hours. Sometimes it's 72 hours that you need to do it. And you have to request to be on the agenda, and we really don't know how you get approved. I made a request to be on the agenda of more than one item, and only one was approved. I don't know who approves it. The trustees haven't told me who approves it. Nobody made a comment of who approves it. Trustee didn't say, how does that get approved? Nobody at the meeting when I voiced it asked that question for me, and it doesn't matter to me how, because clearly it's a majority vote of, do we want somebody who is a public person, who does own property in the village, who does have a concern about, we actually have a concern about a separate property, nothing to do with the right of way, which we're struggling to have it lived in by us. So importantly, we don't know how these things are run, and maybe even the people in charge don't know how they're run. So getting the questions answered and having these things in place is part of what it is our responsibility. And by the way, you don't have to be in the district to ask these questions. Voting And part of protesting and being an important part of the political diplomatic process is being involved and caring enough to be involved in an empowering way. And that is what we are about. So I want to conclude this session. I've run on long, but I don't think it's too much information for you to absorb. I want to continue this over the next several days because we aren't going anywhere. My husband and I, Tim Koster, Holly Koster, we are fully invested in this town where my mother bought a property and dad, sight unseen. And guess what? Her mother was in a beauty shop. Another fun story that we'll be telling on Saturday. I want you, each and every person in Grand Ridge, please go out, get involved, and mostly and most importantly, give us your energy, give us positive vibes, give us good thoughts, send us treats for comfort food, give us a smile when you cross, wave at us even if you don't know us. This is what we are about, letting growth unite us.